I'm sitting down with Patrick Buchanan, senior advisor to Presidents Richard Nixon, Gerald Ford, and Ronald Reagan. He ran for the presidency 3 times. He wrote many books, and some of his books have really menacing titles. His latest book is called Suicide of a Superpower: Will America Survive to 2025? Very pessimistic, sir. Well, first of all, thank you very much for joining me.
Thank you.
With regards to foreign policy, you're saying one of the ways to prevent that suicide from happening is to dismantle the empire. First of all, what do you mean by empire?
Or you might call it the American Imperium or the American Empire. The United States has military bases dating back to the Cold War in Europe, in Asia, the Middle East, Africa, all over the world. And we're running a deficit of 10% of our gross national product. And quite frankly, we can't afford any longer, in my judgment, to continue to carry this enormous burden of defending 40 or 50 countries around the world. And so I think we're going to have to dismantle these bases. We're going to have to come back from Asia, come back from the Middle East and South Asia. And I think we're going to have to bring the troops home from Europe.
You were writing and speaking out extensively about the Bush era crusade under the banner of ending tyranny in the world. Do you think that crusade is still on?
Look, the idea that we're going to end tyranny in the world is utterly utopian. We never are. We've had tyrants from time immemorial. And what the United States should do, in my judgment, in its foreign policies, is build a defense establishment strong enough to protect our vital interest and our vital allies. And when problems arise, whether it's in Zimbabwe or somewhere else, the people there have got to deal with their own problems. There's no doubt about it that throughout history, tyrants have arisen and seized power in one place or another. And as long as they don't threaten our vital interest or threaten and kill our people, the fact that they rule or misrule certain countries is none of our business.
Osama bin Laden's successor said he supports the war against Assad in Syria. And Al-Qaeda was reportedly behind the 4 suicide bombings, which killed scores of Syrian officials and soldiers in Damascus and Aleppo. Doesn't it seem strange that the U.S. is on the same side with Al-Qaeda in Syria?
Well, it does indeed. Listen, the Assad government has been ruthless and brutal in suppressing the uprising and the insurgency against it. Not as brutal as his father was, Hafiz al-Assad, who slaughtered 20,000 people in Hama in 1982 when they rose up. And it would probably be a good thing if he departed and they had a more democratic government. But your point is well taken. The United States should ask itself not only what is the character of this regime, but first question should be, do we have a vital interest in who rules Syria? My answer to that is no. Secondly, if the incumbent government is overthrown, who comes to power in Syria? You have the Muslim Brotherhood is trying to overthrow Assad. You have Al-Qaeda, apparently, which is moving in, trying to overthrow Assad. So we've got to ask ourselves, is the devil we know preferable to the devil we don't know? But in the Syrian situation, I think the very fact that Al-Qaeda has been involved, apparently, in these 4 suicide attacks should tell us that we ought to be wary about overthrowing or participating in a movement to overthrow Assad before we know what's going to replace him.
As you said, it's very hard to tell what's going to happen to Syria if more radical forces seize power. Do you think the U.S. foreign policy might be helping terrorists indirectly?
I think the United States, American strategists would have to be fools not to see what Al-Qaeda is doing, not to ask the question, if it's good for Al-Qaeda, can it be good for us? And not to look at Assad and say, he may be a ruthless dictator in what he's doing, but what comes after him when he falls? I think Al-Qaeda does its best work, or it works best, when it finds a country that is fundamentally a failed state in Yemen, Somalia, Afghanistan under the Taliban. And I think in those conditions, that's where Al-Qaeda can plan and recruit far better than it can when you have a a regime which is a hardline regime running the situation, whether it's secular or whether it's Muslim
Syria
Brotherhood.
torn apart by civil war. That seems like a good environment for them.
I think Syria is really a potential disaster in that we could have there a proxy war between the Sunni and Shia all over that region. They already have Sunni coming in from Iraq. They already have Al-Qaeda in there, apparently. You could have also a conflict, ethnic conflict, with the Druze in there and the Kurds in there, as well as Arabs in there. I think this is why I am against putting weapons in and aiding the anti-Assad resistance, because an all-out war there could be a disaster which leaves a failed state in Syria.
So what about the strategy that the U.S. is now pursuing, putting pressure on Assad alone and not addressing the armed groups, the fighting armed groups among the opposition as well?
Well, I think that's basically the United States has taken sides in this war. We've taken sides there just like we've taken sides in Libya.
What should or what should not the U.S. do here in Syria?
My policy would, if I were in the White House, would be by and large hands off Syria.
In one of your articles, you argue that the Obama administration doesn't want a war with Iran. The Pentagon, U.S. intelligence community, they're saying Iran does not have a nuclear bomb and hasn't decided whether or not to build a nuclear bomb. Iranians obviously gain nothing from a war. If nobody wants it, then why the drums of war? Why are they so loud?
There are people that want a war. I mean, do not think no one wants a war. You don't have wars unless someone wants it. And quite clearly, the Israeli government would like to see the United States smash Iran's nuclear program, which they think is creating the conditions where Iran could, with one leap forward, get a bomb. The Israeli lobby in the United States would like to see a war. They support the Israeli government. The neoconservatives do. Many Republicans do. There are many Americans who genuinely believe that if they believe Iran is moving toward a weapon, and if it is, they would favor military action to prevent it. There are a number of people that want a war.
But is there a vital threat coming from Iran as you see it?
I don't know. I don't. Look, Iran is not. Iran, I mean, during the Cold War, with due respect, Soviet Union had thousands of weapons. They could have destroyed us in an afternoon, and we could have done the same thing. I was around during the Cuban Missile Crisis. That was genuinely terrifying. But Iran doesn't frighten me, and I don't think it should frighten the American people. They don't have a bomb. They haven't made a decision to build one. They don't have the means to deliver one. And the Israelis have 300 atomic bombs. I mean, who presents the existential threat to whom? Well, I'll say who it was. I visited one of my doctors, and we were talking about, I hope we don't have a war in Iran, but now they're talking about intervention in Syria, and he said, thank God for the Russians. They've got some ships out there, and the Americans won't fool around with the Russian ships, so the Russians are keeping us out, and that's wonderful.
That was your doctor?
Yeah, that's one of my doctors.
Do you think that's what the American public thinks?
I don't think any American wants to intervene in Syria. They don't understand anything about it. Iran, though, they got the Ayatollah, and they got Ahmadinejad, and he will always help out the hawks with some insane statement every couple of months. He's going to destroy somebody or other, and then the Americans say we have to get him.
What is the danger of such rhetoric?
The danger of such rhetoric is that it leads to another war in the Middle East, which I think would be a disaster for my country, and I think it would be a disaster for the world economy, and I think it would be a disaster for the world. You know, I opposed Desert Storm back in 1991. I opposed even going in and cleaning Saddam Hussein out of Kuwait because I said this will only be the first Arab-American war. And I was right. I mean, if you talk about Islamic wars, you had the war at Desert Storm, you had the war against Afghanistan, you got the war on Iraq, you had the war in Libya, now they're talking about Syria, now they're talking about Iran. Of what benefit has this been to the United States when you see where we were in 1990 and where we are today, and where China was in 1990 and where China is today? They haven't gone into any of these countries, haven't invaded anybody. And they're moving upward, as is Brazil and as are India. And what are we doing in all these places? I don't think you can't replicate the Middle West in the Middle East.
Thank you.
Thank you.